Hello everyone, and welcome back to Project Moon Audiobooks. Today's episode is Part 2 of The Stranger by Albert Camus. This covers chapters 4 through 6 of Part 1 of the book. I hope you enjoy. I worked hard all week. Raymond stopped by and told me he'd sent a letter. I went to the movies twice with Emmanuel, who doesn't always understand what's going on the screen, so you have to explain things to him. Yesterday was Saturday, and Marie came over as we'd planned. I wanted her so bad when I saw her in that pretty red and white striped dress and leather sandals. You can make out the shape of her firm breasts, and her tan made her face look like a flower. We caught a bus and went a few kilometers outside Algiers, to a beach with rocks at either end, bordered by shore grass on the land side. The 4 o'clock sun wasn't too hot, but the water was warm, with slow, gently lapping waves. Marie taught me a game. As you swam, you had to skim off the foam from the crest of the waves with your mouth, hold it there, then roll over on your back and spout it out toward the sky. This made a delicate froth which disappeared into the air or fell back in a warm spray over my face. But after a while, my mouth was stinging with the salty bitterness. Then Marie swam over to me and pressed herself against me in the water. She put her lips on mine. Her tongue cooled my lips, and we tumbled in the waves for a moment. When we'd gotten dressed again on the beach, Marie looked at me with her eyes sparkling. I kissed her. We didn't say anything more from that point on. I held her to me, and we hurried to catch a bus, get back, go to my place, and throw ourselves onto my bed. I'd left my window open, and the summer night air flowing over our brown bodies felt good. That morning, Marie stayed, and I told her that we would have lunch together. I went downstairs to buy some meat. On my way back upstairs, I heard a woman's voice in Raymond's room. A little later, old Salamano growled at his dog. We heard the sound of footsteps and claws on the wooden stairs, and then,
"Lousy, stinking bastard."
And they went down into the street. I told Marie all about the old man, and she laughed. She was wearing a pair of my pajamas with the sleeves rolled up. When she laughed, I wanted her again. A minute later, she asked me if I loved her. I told her it didn't mean anything, but that I didn't think so. She looked sad. But as we were fixing lunch, and for no apparent reason, she laughed in such a way that I kissed her. It was then that we heard what sounded like a fight break out in Raymond's room. First we heard a woman's shrill voice, and then Raymond saying,
You used me. I'll teach you to use me."
There were some thuds and the woman screamed, but in such a terrifying way that the landing immediately filled with people. Marie and I went to see, too. The woman was still shrieking and Raymond was still hitting her. Marie said it was terrible and I didn't say anything. She asked me to go find a policeman, but I told her I didn't like cops. One showed up anyway with the tenant from the 3rd floor, who's a plumber. The cop knocked on the door and we couldn't hear anything anymore. He knocked harder, and after a minute the woman started crying, and Raymond opened the door. He had a cigarette in his mouth and an innocent look on his face. The girl rushed to the door and told the policeman that Raymond had hit her.
"What's your name?"
the cop said. Raymond told him.
"Take that cigarette out of your mouth when you're talking to me,"
the cop said. Raymond hesitated, looked at me, and took a drag on his cigarette. Right then the cop slapped him. A thick, heavy smack right across the face. The cigarette went flying across the landing. The look on Raymond's face changed, but he didn't say anything for a minute, and then he asked, in a meek voice, if he could pick up his cigarette. The cop said to go ahead and added, "Next time you'll know better than to clown around with a policeman." Meanwhile, the girl was crying and she repeated,
"He beat me up. He's a pimp." "Officer,"
Raymond asked,
"is that legal, calling a man a pimp like that?"
But the cop ordered him to shut his trap. Then Raymond turned to the girl and said,
"You just wait, sweetheart. We're not through yet."
The cop told him to knock it off and said that the girl was to go and he was to stay in his room and wait to be summoned to the police station. He also said that Raymond ought to be ashamed to be so drunk that he'd have the shakes like that. Then Raymond explained,
"I'm not drunk, officer. It's just that I'm here, and you're there, and I'm shaking. I can't help it."
He shut his door and everybody went away. Marie and I finished fixing lunch, but she wasn't hungry. I ate almost everything. She left at 1 o'clock and I slept a while. Around 3 o'clock there was a knock on my door and Raymond came in. I didn't get up. He sat down on the edge of my bed. He didn't say anything for a minute and I asked him how it had all gone. He told me that he'd done what he wanted to do, but that she'd slapped him and so he'd beaten her up. I'd seen the rest. I told him it seemed to me that she'd gotten her punishment now, and he ought to be happy. He thought so too, and he pointed out that the cop could do anything he wanted. It wouldn't change the fact that she'd gotten her beating. He added that he knew all about cops and how to handle them. Then he asked me if I'd expected him to hit the cop back. I said I wasn't expecting anything, and besides, I didn't like cops. Raymond seemed pretty happy. He asked me if I wanted to go for a walk with him. I got up and started combing my hair. He told me that I'd have to act as a witness for him. It didn't matter to me, but I didn't know what I was supposed to say. According to Raymond, all I had to do was state that the girl had cheated on him. I agreed to act as a witness for him. We went out, and Raymond bought me a brandy. Then he wanted to shoot a game of pool, and I just barely lost. Afterwards, he wanted to go to a whorehouse, but I said no, because I don't like that. So we took our time getting back, him telling me how glad he was that he'd been able to give the woman what she deserved. I found him very friendly with me, and I thought it was a nice moment. From a distance, I noticed old Salamano standing on the doorstep. He looked flustered. When we got closer, I saw that he didn't have his dog. He was looking all over the place, turning around, peering into the darkness of the entryway, muttering incoherently, and then he started searching the street again with his little red eyes. When Raymond asked him what was wrong, he didn't answer right away. I barely heard him mumble, "Stinking bastard," and he went on fidgeting around. I asked him where his dog was. He snapped at me and said he was gone. And then, all of a sudden, the words came pouring out.
I took him to the parade ground, like always. There were lots of people around the booths at the fair. I stopped to watch the King of the Escape Artists, and when I was ready to go, he wasn't there. Sure, I've been meaning to get him a smaller collar for a long time, but I never thought the bastard would take off like that.
Then Raymond pointed out to him that the dog might have gotten lost and that he would come back. He gave examples of dogs that had walked dozens of kilometers to get back to their masters. Nevertheless, the old man looked even more flustered.
But they'll take him away from me, don't you see? If only somebody would take him in. But that's impossible. Everybody's disgusted by his scabs. The police will get him for sure.
So I told him he should go to the pound and they'd give the dog back to him after he paid a fee. He asked me if it was a big fee. I didn't know. Then he got mad.
Pay money for that bastard. Ha! He can damn well die.
And he started cursing the dog. Raymond laughed and went inside. I followed him and we parted upstairs on the landing. A minute later, I heard the old man's footsteps and he knocked on my door. When I opened it, he stood in the doorway for a minute and said, Excuse me. I asked him to come in, but he refused. He was looking down at the tips of his shoes and his scabby hands were trembling. Without looking up at me, he asked,
They're not gonna take him away from me, are they, Monsieur Meursault? They'll give him back to me. Otherwise, what's going to happen to me?
I told him that the pound kept dogs for 3 days, so that their owners could come and claim them, and then after that, they did with them as they saw fit. He looked at me in silence. Then he said, Good night. He shut his door, and I heard him pacing back and forth. His bed creaked, and from the peculiar little noise coming through the partition, I realized he was crying. For some reason, I thought of Maman, but I had to get up early the next morning. I wasn't hungry, and I went to bed without any dinner. Raymond called me at the office. He told me that a friend of his, he'd spoken to him about me, had invited me to spend the day Sunday at his little beach house, near Algiers. I said I'd really like to, but I'd promised to spend the day with a girlfriend. Raymond immediately told me that she was invited too. His friend's wife would be very glad not to be alone with a bunch of men. I wanted to hang up right away because I know the boss doesn't like people calling us from town. But Raymond asked me to hang on and told me he could have passed on the invitation that evening, but he had something else to tell me. He'd been followed all day by a group of Arabs, one of whom was the brother of his former mistress.
If you see him hanging around the building when you get home this evening, let me know.
I said I would. A little later, my boss sent for me, and for a second I was annoyed, because I thought he was going to tell me to do less talking on the phone and more work. But that wasn't it at all. He told me he wanted to talk to me about a plan of his that was still pretty vague. He just wanted to have my opinion on the matter. He was planning to open an office in Paris which would handle his business directly with the big companies, on the spot, and he wanted to know how I felt about going there. I'd be able to live in Paris and to travel around for part of the year as well. You're young, and it seems to me it's the kind of life that would appeal to you. I said yes, but that really was all the same to me. Then he asked me if I wasn't interested in a change of life. I said that people never change their lives, that in any case one life was as good as another, and that I wasn't dissatisfied with mine here at all. He looked upset and told me that I never gave him a straight answer, that I had no ambition, and that was disastrous in business. So I went back to work. I would rather not have upset him, but I couldn't see any reason to change my life. Looking back on it, I wasn't unhappy. When I was a student, I had lots of ambitions like that. But when I had to give up my studies, I learned very quickly that none of it really mattered. That evening, Marie came by to see me and asked me if I wanted to marry her. I said it didn't make any difference to me and that we could if she wanted to. Then she wanted to know if I loved her. I answered the same way I had the last time, that it didn't mean anything but that I probably didn't love her. So why marry me then? She said. I explained to her that it didn't really matter and that if she wanted to, we could get married. Besides, she was the one who was doing the asking and all I was saying was yes. Then she pointed out that marriage was a serious thing. I said no. She stopped talking for a minute and looked at me without saying anything. Then she spoke. She just wanted to know if I would have accepted the same proposal from another woman, with whom I was involved in the same way. I said, sure. Then she said she wondered if she loved me, and there was no way I could know about that. After another moment's silence, she mumbled that I was peculiar, that was probably why she loved me, but that one day I might hate her for the same reason. I didn't say anything, because I didn't have anything to add, so she took my arm with a smile and said she wanted to marry me. I said we could do it whenever she wanted. Then I told her about my boss's proposition, and she said she'd love to see Paris. I told her that I'd lived there once, and she asked me what it was like. I said, it's dirty. Lots of pigeons and dark courtyards. Everybody's pale. Then we went for a walk through the main streets to the other end of town. The women were beautiful, and I asked Marie if she'd noticed. She said yes, and that she understood what I meant. For a while, neither of us said anything. But I wanted her to stay with me, and I told her we could have dinner together at Celeste's. She would have liked to, but she had something to do. We were near my place, and I said goodbye to her. She looked at me. Don't you want to know what I have to do? I did, but I hadn't thought to ask, and she seemed to be scolding me. Then, seeing me so confused, she laughed again, and she moved toward me with her whole body to offer me her lips. I had dinner at Celeste's. I'd already started eating when a strange little woman came in and asked me if she could sit at my table. Of course she could. Her gestures were jerky, and she had bright eyes and a little face like an apple. She took off her jacket, sat down, and studied the menu feverishly. She called Celeste over and ordered her whole meal all at once, in a voice that was clear and very fast at the same time. While she was waiting for her first course, she opened her bag, took out a slip of paper and a pencil, added up the bill in advance, then took the exact amount, plus tip, out of a vest pocket and set it down on the table in front of her. At that point, the waiter brought her first course and she gulped it down. While waiting for the next course, she again took out of her bag a blue pencil and a magazine that listed the radio programs for the next week. One by one, and with great care, she checked off almost every program. Since the magazine was about a dozen pages long, she meticulously continued this task throughout the meal. I had already finished, and she was still checking away with the same zeal. Then she stood up, put her jacket back on with the same robot-like movements, and left. I didn't have anything to do, so I left too and followed her for a while. She had positioned herself right next to the curb and was making her way with incredible speed and assurance, never once swerving or looking around. I eventually lost sight of her and turned back. I thought about how peculiar she was, but forgot about her a few minutes later. I found old Salamano waiting outside my door. I asked him in, and he told me that his dog was lost, because it wasn't at the pound. The people who worked there had told him that maybe it had been run over. He asked if he could find out at the police station. They told him that they didn't keep track of things like that because they happen every day. I told old Salamano that he could get another dog, but he was right to point out to me that he was used to this one. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, and Salamano had sat down on a chair in front of the table. He was facing me, and he had both hands on his knees. He had kept his old felt hat on. He was mumbling bits and pieces of sentences through his yellowing mustache. He was getting on my nerves a little, but I didn't have anything to do, and I didn't feel sleepy. Just for something to say, I asked him about his dog. He told me he'd gotten it after his wife died. He had married fairly late. When he was young, he'd wanted to go into the theater. In the army, he used to act in military vaudevilles. But he had ended up working on the railroads, and he didn't regret it, because now he had a small pension. He hadn't been happy with his wife, but he'd pretty much gotten used to her. When she died, he had been very lonely. So he asked a shop buddy for a dog, and he'd gotten this one very young. He'd had to feed it from a bottle, but since a dog doesn't live as long as a man, they ended up being old together.
He was bad-tempered,
Solomano said.
We'd have a run-in every now and then, but he was a good dog just the same.
I said he was well-bred, and Solomano looked pleased.
And,
he added,
you didn't know him before he got sick. His coat was the best thing about him.
Every night and every morning after the dog had gotten that skin disease, Solomano rubbed him with ointment. But according to him, the dog's real sickness was old age, and there's no cure for old age. At that point I yawned, and the old man said he'd be going. I told him that he could stay and that I was sorry about what had happened to his dog. He thanked me. He told me that Maman was very fond of his dog. He called her, "Your poor mother." He said he supposed I must be very sad since Maman died, and I didn't say anything. Then he said, very quickly and with an embarrassed look, that he realized that some people in the neighborhood thought badly of me for having sent Maman to the home, but he knew me and he knew I loved her very much. I still don't know why, but I said that until then I hadn't realized that people thought badly of me for doing it, but that the home had seemed like the natural thing since I didn't have enough money to have Maman cared for. Anyway, I added, it had been a long time since she'd had anything to say to me, and she was bored all by herself.
Yes,
he said,
and at least in a home you can make a few friends.
Then he said goodnight. He wanted to sleep. His life had changed now, and he wasn't too sure what he was going to do. For the first time since I'd known him, and with a furtive gesture, he offered me his hand, and I felt the scales on his skin. He gave a little smile, and before he left, he said,
I hope the dogs don't bark tonight. I always think it's mine.
I had a hard time waking up on Sunday, and Marie had to call me and shake me. We didn't eat anything, because we wanted to get to the beach early. I felt completely drained, and I had a slight headache. My cigarette tasted bitter. Marie made fun of me because, she said, I had on a funeral face. She had put on a white linen dress and let her hair down. I told her she was beautiful, and she laughed with delight. On our way downstairs, we knocked on Raymond's door. He told us he'd be right down. Once out in the street, because I was so tired and also because we hadn't opened the blinds, the day, already bright with the sun, hit me like a slap in the face. Marie was jumping with joy and kept on saying what a beautiful day it was. I felt a little better, and I noticed that I was hungry. I told Marie, who pointed to her oilcloth bag where she'd put our bathing suits and a towel. I just had to wait, and then we heard Raymond shutting his door. He had on blue trousers and a white short-sleeved shirt, but he'd put on a straw hat, which made Marie laugh, and his forearms were all white under the black hairs. I found it a little repulsive. He was whistling as he came down the stairs, and he seemed very cheerful. He said,
Good morning, old man,
to me, and called Marie,
Mademoiselle.
The day before, we'd gone to the police station, and I'd testified that the girl had cheated on Raymond. He'd gotten off with a warning. They didn't check out my statement. Outside the front door, we talked about it with Raymond, and then we decided to take the bus. The beach wasn't very far, but we'd get there sooner that way. Raymond thought his friend would be glad to see us get there early. We were just about to leave when all of a sudden Raymond motioned to me to look across the street. I saw a group of Arabs leaning against the front of the tobacconist's shop. They were staring at us in silence, but in that way of theirs, as if we were nothing but stones or dead trees. Raymond told me that the second one from the left was his man, and he seemed worried. But, he added, it was all settled now. Marie didn't really understand and asked us what was wrong. I told her that they were Arabs who had it in for Raymond. She wanted to get going right away. Raymond drew himself up and laughed, saying we'd better step on it. We headed toward the bus stop, which wasn't far, and Raymond said that the Arabs weren't following us. I turned around. They were still in the same place, and they were looking with the same indifference at the spot where we'd just been standing. We caught the bus. Raymond, who seemed very relieved, kept on cracking jokes for Marie. I could tell he liked her, but she hardly said anything to him. Every once in a while, she'd look at him and laugh. We got off in the outskirts of Algiers. The beach wasn't far from the bus stop, but we had to cross a small plateau which overlooks the sea and then drops steeply down to the beach. It was covered with yellowish rocks and the whitest asphodels set against the already hard blue of the sky. Marie was having fun scattering the petals, taking big swipes at them with her oilcloth bag. We walked between rows of small houses behind green or white fences, some with their verandas hidden behind the tamarisks, others standing naked among the rocks. Before we reached the edge of the plateau, we could already see the motionless sea and, farther out, a massive, drowsy-looking promontory in the clear water. The faint hum of a motor rose up to us in the still air, and way off we saw a tiny trawler moving, almost imperceptibly, across the dazzling sea. Marie gathered some rock irises. From the slope leading down to the beach, we could see that there were already some people swimming. Raymond's friend lived in a little wooden bungalow at the far end of the beach. The back of the house rested up against the rocks, and the pilings that held it up in the front went straight down into the water. Raymond introduced us. His friend's name was Meursault. He was a big guy, very tall and broad-shouldered, with a plump, sweet little wife with a Parisian accent. Right off, he told us to make ourselves at home, and said that his wife had just fried up some fish he'd caught that morning. I told him how nice I thought his house was. He told me that he spent Saturdays and Sundays and all his days off there. "With my wife, of course," he added. Just then, his wife was laughing with Marie. For the first time, maybe, I really thought I was going to get married. Meursault wanted to go for a swim, but his wife and Raymond didn't want to come. The three of us went down to the beach, and Marie jumped right in. Meursault and I waited a little. He spoke slowly, and I noticed that he had a habit of finishing everything he said with, "and I'd even say," when really it didn't add anything to the meaning of his sentence. Referring to Marie, he said, "She's stunning, and I'd even say charming." After that, I didn't pay any more attention to this mannerism of his, because I was absorbed by the feeling that the sun was doing me a lot of good. The sand was starting to get hot underfoot. I held back the urge to get into the water a minute longer, but finally I said to Meursault, "Shall we?" I dove in. He waded in slowly and started swimming only when he couldn't touch the bottom anymore. He did the breaststroke, and not too well either, so I left him and joined Marie. The water was cold and I was glad to be swimming. Together again, Marie and I swam out a ways, and we felt a closeness as we moved in unison and were happy. Out in deeper water, we floated on our backs, and the sun on my upturned face was drying the last of the water trickling into my mouth. We saw Meursault making his way back to the beach to stretch out in the sun. From far away, he looked huge. Marie wanted us to swim together. I got behind her to hold her around the waist. She used her arms to move us forward, and I did the kicking. The little splashing sound followed us through the morning air until I got tired. I left Marie and headed back, swimming smoothly and breathing easily. On the beach, I stretched out on my stomach alongside Meursault and put my face on the sand. I said it was nice, and he agreed. Soon afterwards, Marie came back. I rolled over to watch her coming. She was glistening all over with salty water and holding her hair back. She lay down right next to me, and the combined warmth from her body and from the sun made me doze off. Marie shook me and told me that Meursault had gone back up to the house, that it was time for lunch. I got up right away because I was hungry, but Marie told me I hadn't kissed her since that morning. It was true, and yet I had wanted to. "Come into the water," she said. We ran and threw ourselves into the first little waves. We swam a few strokes, and she reached out and held on to me. I felt her legs wrapped around mine, and I wanted her. When we got back, Meursault was already calling us. I said I was starving, and then out of the blue he announced to his wife that he liked me. The bread was good. I devoured my share of the fish. After that, there was some meat and some fried potatoes. We all ate without talking. Meursault drank a lot of wine and kept filling my glass. By the time the coffee came, my head felt heavy and I smoked a lot. Meursault, Raymond, and I talked about spending August together at the beach, sharing expenses. Suddenly, Marie said, "Do you know what time it is? It's only 11:30. We were all surprised, but Meursault said that we'd eaten very early, and that it was only natural because lunchtime was whenever you were hungry. For some reason, that made Marie laugh. I think she'd had a little too much to drink. Then Meursault asked me if I wanted to go for a walk on the beach with him. My wife always takes a nap after lunch. Me, I don't like naps. I need to walk. I tell her all the time it's better for her health, but it's her business. Marie said she'd stay and help Madame Meursault with the dishes. The little Parisienne said that first they'd have to get rid of the men. The three of us went down to the beach. The sun was shining almost directly overhead onto the sand, and the glare on the water was unbearable. There was no one left on the beach. From inside the bungalows bordering the plateau and jutting out over the water, we could hear the rattling of plates and silverware. It was hard to breathe in the rocky heat rising from the ground. At first, Raymond and Meursault discussed people and things I didn't know about. I gathered they'd known each other for a long time and had even lived together at one point. We headed down to the sea and walked along the water's edge. Now and then, a little wave would come up higher than the others and wet our canvas shoes. I wasn't thinking about anything, because I was half asleep from the sun beating down on my bare head. At that point, Raymond said something to Meursault which I didn't quite catch, but at the same time I noticed, at the far end of the beach and a long way from us, two Arabs in blue overalls coming in our direction. I looked at Raymond and he said,
"It's him."
We kept walking. Meursault asked how they'd managed to follow us all this way. I thought they must have seen us get on the bus with a beach bag, but I didn't say anything. The Arabs were walking slowly, but they were already much closer. We didn't change our pace, but Raymond said,
"If there's any trouble, Meursault, you take the other one. I'll take care of my man. Meursault, if another one shows up, he's yours."
I said, yes, and Meursault put his hands in his pockets. The blazing sand looked red to me now. We moved steadily toward the Arabs. The distance between us was getting shorter and shorter. When we were just a few steps away from each other, the Arabs stopped. Meursault and I slowed down. Raymond went right up to his man. I couldn't hear what he said to him, but the other guy made a move as though he were going to butt him. Then Raymond struck the first blow and called Meursault right away. Meursault went for the one that had been pointed out as his and hit him twice, as hard as he could. The Arab fell flat in the water, face down, and lay there for several seconds with bubbles bursting on the surface around his head. Meanwhile, Raymond had landed one too, and the other Arab's face was bleeding. Raymond turned to me and said,
"Watch this. I'm gonna let him have it now."
I shouted, "Look out, he's got a knife!" But Raymond's arm had already been cut open, and his mouth slashed. Meursault lunged forward, but the other Arab had gotten back up and gone around behind the one with the knife. We didn't dare move. They started backing off slowly, without taking their eyes off us, keeping us at bay with the knife. When they thought they were far enough away, they took off running as fast as they could, while we stood there motionless in the sun, and Raymond clutched at his arm, dripping with blood. Meursault immediately said there was a doctor who spent his Sundays up on the plateau. Raymond wanted to go see him right away, but every time he tried to talk, the blood bubbled in his mouth. We steadied him and made our way back to the bungalow as quickly as we could. Once there, Raymond said that they were only flesh wounds, and that he could make it to the doctor's. He left with Meursault, and I stayed to explain to the women what had happened. Madame Meursault was crying, and Marie was very pale. I didn't like having to explain to them, so I just shut up, smoked a cigarette, and looked at the sea. Raymond came back with Meursault around 1:30. His arm was bandaged up, and he had an adhesive plaster on the corner of his mouth. The doctor had told him that it was nothing, but Raymond looked pretty grim. Meursault tried to make him laugh, but he still wouldn't say anything. When he said he was going down to the beach, I asked him where he was going. He said he wanted to get some air. Meursault and I said we'd go with him, but that made him angry, and he swore at us. Meursault said not to argue with him. I followed him anyway. We walked on the beach for a long time. By now, the sun was overpowering. It shattered into little pieces on the sand and water. I had the impression that Raymond knew where he was going, but I was probably wrong. At the far end of the beach, we finally came to a little spring running down through the sand behind a large rock. There we found our two Arabs. They were lying down in their greasy overalls. They seemed perfectly calm and almost content. Our coming changed nothing. The one who had attacked Raymond was looking at him without saying anything. The other one was blowing through a little reed over and over again, watching us out of the corner of his eye. He kept repeating the only 3 notes he could get out of his instrument. The whole time, there was nothing but the sun and the silence, with the low gurgling from the spring and the 3 notes. Then Raymond put his hand in his hip pocket but the others didn't move. They just kept looking at each other. I noticed that the toes on the one playing the flute were tensed, but without taking his eyes off his adversary, Raymond asked me,
"Should I let him have it?"
I thought that if I said no, he'd get himself all worked up and shoot for sure. All I said was, "He hasn't said anything yet. It'd be pretty lousy to shoot him like that." You could still hear the sound of the water and the flute deep within the silence and the heat. Then Raymond said,
"So I'll call him something, and when he answers back, I'll let him have it."
I answered, "Right, but if he doesn't draw his knife, you can't shoot." Raymond started getting worked up. The other Arab went on playing, and both of them were watching every move Raymond made. "No," I said to Raymond. "Take him on man to man, and give me your gun. If the other one moves in, or if he draws his knife, I'll let him have it." The sun glinted off Raymond's gun as he handed it to me, but we just stood there motionless, as if everything had closed in around us. We stared at each other without blinking, and everything came to a stop there between the sea, the sand, and the sun, and the double silence of the flute and the water. It was then that I realized that you could either shoot or not shoot. But all of a sudden, the Arabs, backing away, slipped behind the rock. So Raymond and I turned and headed back the way we'd come. He seemed better and talked about the bus back. I went with him as far as the bungalow, and as he climbed the wooden steps, I just stood there at the bottom, my head ringing from the sun, unable to face the effort it would take to climb the wooden staircase and face the women again. But the heat was so intense that it was just as bad standing still in the blinding stream falling from the sky. To stay or to go, it amounted to the same thing. A minute later, I turned back towards the beach and started walking. There was the same dazzling red glare. The sea gasped for air with each shallow, stifled little wave that broke on the sand. I was walking slowly toward the rocks, and I could feel my forehead swelling under the sun. All that heat was pressing down on me and making it hard for me to go on. And every time I felt a blast of its hot breath strike my face, I gritted my teeth, clenched my fists in my trouser pockets, and strained every nerve in order to overcome the sun and the thick drunkenness it was spilling over me. With every blade of light that flashed off the sand, from a bleached shell or a piece of broken glass, my jaws tightened. I walked for a long time. From a distance, I could see the small, dark mass of rock surrounded by a blinding halo of light and sea spray. I was thinking of the cool spring behind the rock. I wanted to hear the murmur of its water again, to escape the sun and the strain and the women's tears, and to find shade and rest again at last. But as I got closer, I saw that Raymond's man had come back. He was alone. He was lying on his back, with his hands behind his head, his forehead in the shade of the rock, the rest of his body in the sun. His blue overalls seemed to be steaming in the heat. I was a little surprised. As far as I was concerned, the whole thing was over, and I'd gone there without even thinking about it. As soon as he saw me, he sat up a little and put his hand in his pocket. Naturally, I gripped Raymond's gun inside my jacket. Then he lay back again, but without taking his hand out of his pocket. I was pretty far away from him, about 10 meters or so. I could tell he was glancing at me now and then through half-closed eyes, but most of the time, he was just a form shimmering before my eyes in the fiery air. The sound of the waves was even lazier, more drawn out than at noon. It was the same sun, the same light still shining on the same sand as before. For 2 hours the day had stood still. For 2 hours it had been anchored in a sea of molten lead. On the horizon, a tiny steamer went by, and I made out the black dot from the corner of my eye because I hadn't stopped watching the Arab. It occurred to me that all I had to do was turn around, and that would be the end of it. But the whole beach, throbbing in the sun, was pressing on my back. I took a few steps toward the spring. The Arab didn't move. Besides, he was still pretty far away. Maybe it was the shadows on his face, but it looked like he was laughing. I waited. The sun was starting to burn my cheeks, and I could feel drops of sweat gathering in my eyebrows. The sun was the same as it had been the day I buried Maman, and like then, my forehead especially was hurting me. All the veins in it throbbing under the skin. It was this burning, which I couldn't stand anymore, that made me move forward. I knew that it was stupid, that I wouldn't get the sun off me by stepping forward, but I took a step, one step, forward. And this time, without getting up, the Arab drew his knife and held it up to me in the sun. The light shot off the steel, and it was like a long, flashing blade cutting at my forehead. At the same instant, the sweat in my eyebrows dripped down over my eyelids all at once and covered them with a warm, thick film. My eyes were blinded behind the curtain of tears and salt. All I could feel were the symbols of sunlight crashing on my forehead and, indistinctly, the dazzling spear flying up from the knife in front of me. The scorching blade slashed at my eyelashes and stabbed at my stinging eyes. That's when everything began to reel. The sea carried up a thick, fiery breath. It seemed to me as if the sky split open from one end to the other to rain down fire. My whole being tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. I felt the smooth underside of the butt. And there, in that noise, sharp and deafening at the same time, is where it all started. I shook off the sweat and sun. I knew that I had shattered the harmony of the day, the exceptional silence of a beach where I'd been happy. Then I fired 4 more times at the motionless body where the bullets lodged without leaving a trace, and it was like knocking 4 quick times on the door of unhappiness.